In 1895, John Pierpont Morgan sat in his private library surrounded by first-edition manuscripts and Renaissance art. Outside, financial panic gripped Wall Street. Inside, Morgan radiated an unshakable calm that would become legendary. While other bankers scrambled and panicked, Morgan made decisions with absolute certainty. Historians would later attribute this to his personality, his experience, his strategic genius. But Neville Goddard, the mystic who decoded the hidden mechanics of consciousness, saw something else entirely. He saw a man who had unconsciously mastered what Goddard would later call the state of the wish fulfilled. Morgan didn't hope markets would stabilize. He acted as though they already had. And reality conformed. Today, we're not claiming Morgan studied metaphysics. We're decoding the psychological state that men of his caliber naturally occupy. The frequency of absolute certainty. The mental posture of someone who owns reality instead of reacting to it. Neville Goddard spent decades teaching that this state is not reserved for financial titans. It's a learnable skill, a trainable frequency, and by the end of this exploration, you'll understand exactly how to assume the consciousness of wealth before a single dollar arrives. Not as theory, as practice. Let's be honest about where you are right now. You check your bank account and feel that familiar tightness in your chest. You watch others succeed and wonder what invisible advantage they possess. You've tried affirmations, vision boards, gratitude journals. Some days you feel hopeful. Most days you feel like you're performing optimism while drowning in doubt. And here's the brutal truth about why nothing has fundamentally shifted. You're operating from the state of someone who needs money. Every action you take, every thought you think, every prayer you whisper is saturated with lack. You're trying to arrive somewhere instead of already being there. You're asking for wealth instead of assuming it. And the universe doesn't respond to your words. It responds to your state of consciousness. Neville Goddard taught that your imagination is not a tool for wishing. It's the workshop where reality is manufactured. But most people use imagination to rehearse poverty. They imagine bills piling up. They imagine rejection. They imagine failure. Then they wonder why life keeps delivering exactly what they've been mentally practicing. You've been training yourself to experience scarcity with the same dedication a billionaire trains himself to experience abundance. The difference is not talent, connections, or luck. The difference is the habitual state you return to when no one is watching. The internal frequency you broadcast every moment you're not consciously choosing otherwise. Consider what Morgan demonstrated during the panic of 1907. While other financiers collapsed into reactive chaos, Morgan organized emergency meetings, pooled resources, and stabilized markets through sheer force of coordinated action. What historians call decisive leadership, Neville Goddard would identify as something deeper. Morgan operated from a state of assumption that the crisis would resolve in his favor. Not because he possessed secret information, not because he manipulated hidden levers, but because his entire nervous system assumed authority and control. His body language, his tone, his decisions all radiated inevitability. And other powerful men unconsciously aligned with that certainty. This is the diagnostic truth you must confront. You're attempting to manipulate external conditions when you should be transforming internal states. You're obsessed with figuring out the how when you should be establishing the who. Who are you being right now in this present moment? Are you the person who desperately needs wealth, or the person who naturally possesses it? Because those are two completely different frequencies of consciousness. And only one of them magnetizes abundance. The other repels it through the very intensity of its wanting. Neville Goddard once told a story about a student who came to him financially desperate. The man had tried everything rational. Multiple jobs, loan applications, family assistance. Nothing worked. The harder he chased money, the faster it evaporated. Neville looked at him and said something that sounded absurd. "You're trying to get money. Stop. You already have it." The student was understandably confused. Neville explained that imagination is not fantasy or escapism. Imagination is the creative power of infinite intelligence itself, operating through human consciousness. When you imagine something with sufficient vividness and feeling, you're not pretending. You're selecting a reality that already exists in the infinite field of quantum possibilities. Neville instructed the student to enter a drowsy, relaxed state every night before sleep, and construct a specific scene that would necessarily imply wealth had already materialized. Not wishing for money, not visualizing checks floating through space, but living mentally in a scene that could only exist if the financial problem was already completely solved. The student chose to imagine himself walking into a bank and depositing a substantial check with calm, natural confidence. Every night, he replayed that scene with sensory richness until it felt more real than his current struggling circumstances. Within 3 weeks, an unexpected business opportunity materialized. A deal he had abandoned years earlier suddenly reactivated. The money arrived. But more importantly, the fundamental state of consciousness shifted permanently. Neville Goddard taught that you don't attract what you want. You attract what you are. And what you are is determined by the state you most frequently inhabit. Most people occupy the state of wanting, hoping, struggling, trying. Individuals like Morgan occupied the state of having, knowing, being, commanding. When Morgan entered a boardroom, he didn't hope to win negotiations. He had already won them in consciousness. His physical actions were simply the three-dimensional afterimage of a decision already made in imagination. This is why he could maintain composure during financial chaos, while others panicked. He wasn't reacting to external turbulence. He was living from an internal certainty so absolute that external conditions had no choice but to eventually conform. The mystic William Blake, who profoundly influenced Neville Goddard's metaphysical framework, wrote, "All that you behold, though it appears without, it is within, in your imagination, of which this world of mortality is but a shadow." Whether Morgan consciously understood this principle or simply embodied it naturally through temperament is irrelevant. The principle operated through him. Every major financial decision, every strategic move, every high-stakes negotiation emerged from a consciousness that assumed success before acting. He trained his imagination the way an Olympic athlete trains physical muscles. An imagination, being the creative power of divine mind itself, responded by delivering the physical equivalent of his mental images. This is the Neville Goddard insight that transforms everything. You're not trying to bend reality through effort. You're selecting which reality you experience by choosing which state of consciousness you occupy. And the state you occupy is determined entirely by what you imagine and accept as true about yourself. Morgan imagined and assumed ownership, authority, dominance. You imagine and assume need, lack, insufficiency. Morgan felt certainty in his bones. You feel hope mixed with doubt. And that microscopic difference in habitual state produces a cosmic difference in manifested results. The gap between poverty and wealth is not a gap of action. It's a gap of assumption. The law of assumption is the master key to all manifestation. Neville Goddard stated, "Assume the feeling of your wish fulfilled and observe the route that your attention follows." This is not positive thinking or affirmation repetition. This is identity transformation at the level of consciousness. When you truly assume something, you don't hope it will eventually happen. You proceed as though it already has. You think from the end result, not toward it. You don't imagine the process of getting the job. You imagine already being in the job and what that allows you to experience. You don't imagine receiving money. You imagine already having money and the natural activities that flow from that possession. Assumption is fundamentally different from belief. Belief implies that doubt remains possible as an alternative. Assumption bypasses the entire mechanism of doubt. When you assume something with completeness, your subconscious mind accepts it as established fact and immediately begins reorganizing your perceptions, decisions, opportunities, and circumstances to match that assumption. This is what separated figures like Morgan from others. While most bankers believed they could potentially succeed, Morgan assumed success was inevitable. The assumption created the reality, not the reverse sequence. Joseph Murphy, who studied the same mystical tradition as Neville Goddard, explained this through the mechanics of subconscious programming. He taught, your subconscious mind does not argue with you. It accepts whatever your conscious mind decrees as true. If you declare I am wealthy and genuinely feel that statement as present reality, your subconscious begins attracting circumstances, people, and opportunities that perfectly match that decree. If you declare I need money, your subconscious registers lack as your identity and produces more experiences of lack. The subconscious is utterly faithful. It gives you exactly what you assume to be true about yourself right now. Morgan operated from an assumption of financial invincibility, not arrogance or ego inflation. Pure assumption hardened into identity. He assumed that capital flowed naturally to him, that negotiations closed favorably, that markets moved in alignment with his vision. And because he assumed these things with such totality, his entire nervous system relaxed into authority. His decisions became sharp and clear. His presence became magnetically compelling. People felt his certainty and interpreted it as genius or divine favor. But it wasn't supernatural genius. It was assumption crystallized into unshakable identity through repetition. The Bible, which Neville Goddard decoded as a psychological manual rather than historical chronicle, states, "To him who has, more will be given. To him who has not, even what he has will be taken away." This is not moral judgment or divine favoritism. It's mechanical psychological law. If you assume you already have, you naturally operate from abundance consciousness. Abundance consciousness attracts more abundance through vibrational resonance. If you assume you lack, you operate from scarcity consciousness. Scarcity consciousness attracts more scarcity through that same principle of resonance. The state you assume determines the reality you experience. Not eventually, not tomorrow. Right now in this present moment. Here's the precise technique Neville Goddard prescribed for deliberate manifestation. Every night before sleep, allow yourself to enter a drowsy, deeply relaxed state where the conscious mind loosens control. In that liminal state between waking and sleeping, construct a simple scene that naturally implies your wish is already fulfilled. Don't imagine the process of manifestation. Imagine the end result. If you desire financial freedom, imagine a specific conversation where someone congratulates you on your success. Feel the handshake. Hear the exact words. See the facial expressions. Let the scene loop repeatedly until it feels more real than your current physical circumstances. Practice this every night until the inner feeling matches the outer desire. Then release attachment to timing and method. Let your subconscious execute the manifestation. Your only job is to assume the state. The how will reveal itself. Morgan didn't sit in his library wondering how to dominate American finance. He sat in his library already assuming he did dominate it. And from that assumption, every strategy, every partnership, every calculated risk became obvious. The how revealed itself naturally because The who was already firmly established in consciousness. You're trying to figure out the path before you've become the person who walks it. You have the sequence reversed. Assume the identity first with complete feeling. The path will appear automatically. Let's translate this directly into your immediate life. You're not attempting to build a railroad empire or rescue the national banking system, but you are trying to pay rent, grow a business, escape debt, create genuine security. The metaphysical principle remains identical. The scale of application is utterly irrelevant to the law's operation. Whether you're manifesting $10 or 10 million, the law of assumption functions exactly the same way. You must occupy the state of consciousness of the person who already possesses what you currently desire. Joseph Murphy connected this directly to financial prosperity through his teaching on subconscious programming. He taught that your subconscious mind operates like infinitely fertile soil. Whatever seeds of thought and feeling you consistently plant, it grows without judgment or discrimination. If you plant mental seeds of poverty consciousness, you harvest poverty experiences. If you plant mental seeds of wealth consciousness, you harvest wealth experiences. The garden doesn't evaluate or judge. It simply responds with absolute faithfulness. Morgan, whether consciously or unconsciously, planted seeds of dominance, authority, and financial command every single day. He didn't review his fears each morning. He reviewed his certainties. And his subconscious mind, being the faithful servant it is, manifested those certainties into three-dimensional physical form. The parable of the talents from Scripture provides a perfect metaphor for this psychological law. A master distributes different amounts of money to 3 servants. 2 immediately invest and multiply their portions. 1 buries his portion in fearful paralysis. The master rewards those who assumed growth was inevitable and acted from abundance consciousness. He removes the portion from the one who assumed scarcity and operated from fear. This is not moral judgment. It's state, consciousness. The servants who multiplied their talents assumed expansion was natural and inevitable. The servant who buried his talent assumed loss was inevitable. Both groups received exactly what they assumed. Your assumption literally becomes your experienced reality. Abdullah, Neville Goddard's teacher and mentor, once looked at him during a moment of doubt and declared, "You are already the man you want to be. You just don't know it yet." This is the core practice that changes everything. You must begin living from the end immediately. Not when external conditions improve, not when money physically arrives. Now. If you want to embody wealth consciousness, how does a genuinely wealthy person think when they wake up? How do they carry their body? How do they make decisions? How do they respond to temporary setbacks? You must embody that complete state before any evidence appears in physical reality. The evidence doesn't create the state. The state creates the evidence through law. Here's the exact technique for financial manifestation using principles demonstrated by figures like Morgan. Tonight before sleep, imagine yourself in a boardroom, an office, or any setting that naturally implies financial success has already materialized. Don't imagine asking for money or hoping for opportunity. Imagine having already made a brilliant decision that secured your wealth. Feel the deep satisfaction. Hear someone say with genuine respect, "You called it perfectly." See yourself signing important documents, shaking hands with confidence, walking out with absolute certainty. Loop that scene with sensory detail until your physical body feels the relief of financial pressure being completely gone. Practice this every night for 30 consecutive days minimum. Don't check obsessively for physical results. Don't try to figure out how manifestation will occur. Simply assume the state completely and allow universal intelligence to orchestrate the details. Supporting this practice, William Blake wrote, What is now proved was once only imagined. Morgan proved his financial dominance in physical reality because he first imagined and assumed it in consciousness with such focused intensity that imagination became inevitable destiny. You possess this exact same capability, not because you're special or chosen, because the law is completely impersonal and universal. It operates for everyone who correctly applies it. Divine Mind doesn't evaluate your history, your past failures, your current doubts. It responds only to your present state of consciousness. Transform the state, transform the life. It's law. The lesson is elegant, but requires discipline. You've been conditioned to react to circumstances. Neville Goddard teaches you to create circumstances through consciousness. You've been trained to hope for better external conditions. Figures like Morgan lived from internal states that didn't yet exist physically until they manifested. The gap between where you currently are and where you want to be is not fundamentally a gap of action or strategy. It's a gap of assumption. You must stop being the person who needs and become the person who has. Not through arrogance or delusion, through conscious assumption. Here's the metaphysical resolution. Your imagination is not separate from reality or opposed to it. Your imagination is the womb where all physical reality is conceived before birth. Every billionaire fortune, every empire, every dynasty began as an imaginal act in someone's consciousness. Morgan didn't discover wealth lying on the ground. He assumed wealth in consciousness so completely that physical wealth had no choice but to conform. You're waiting for permission from external circumstances to feel abundant. But circumstances are waiting for permission from your consciousness. Physical conditions will not shift until your state shifts first. And you shift state by deliberately choosing what you imagine and feel as true. The conclusion is this: you've been applying the law in reverse sequence. You've been trying to feel wealthy after money physically arrives. The law of assumption requires you to feel wealthy before money arrives. The feeling is the cause. The money is the effect. Never the reverse. Neville Goddard taught, feeling is the secret. Not thinking, not wishing, not hoping. Feeling. When you can lie in bed tonight and genuinely feel as wealthy as Morgan felt at his peak, universal intelligence has no choice but to deliver perfectly matching circumstances. It's impersonal law. It's mechanical. It's inevitable. If this exploration resonated with your consciousness, if you felt something fundamental shift in your understanding, then you belong to a specific community. A community of individuals who refuse to remain victims of circumstance and choose instead to become conscious architects of reality. Subscribe to the Goddard Code. Join us as we decode the metaphysical laws that figures of power naturally embody, and most people never discover. Every video is a key. Every teaching is a frequency upgrade. This is not entertainment or motivation. This is practical metaphysical training for consciousness transformation. And remember what Neville Goddard offered as his final teaching to humanity. Dare to believe in the reality of your assumption and watch the world play its part relative to its fulfillment. Morgan dared to assume financial dominance. You must dare to assume whatever you desire. The state of wealth consciousness is not reserved for historical titans or the chosen few. It's available immediately to anyone willing to assume it completely. Stop counting coins and reacting to lack. Start occupying the consciousness of abundance. The frequency already exists within you. You simply must tune your imagination to match it.